What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to my subscribers, and if you're new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to have a little bit of fun with this one. Today I want to talk about the top 5 ways to have an absolute failure of a hunt on a big woods property. So, all right, let's get into it. Number 1, if you do not want to see any deer on a big woods property, don't plant food plots. Because the problem with not having food plots on a big woods property is you have absolutely no idea where those deer are feeding on a daily basis, because the food that is naturally available in the big woods just changes so frequently. So it's a lot of like random locations for food. Now, it's not that those big oak trees that are dropping acorns are changing their location in the woods and moving around or anything, but the number of acorns they drop changes every year. The time of year that those acorns drop changes every year. The other critters out in the woods that maybe got to those acorns before the deer found them can change every year. So maybe a big flock of turkeys went and grabbed all those acorns before the deer even found them one year, and then a different year the deer found them first. So it's just too difficult to try to figure out where those deer are moving on a daily basis when you don't give them something like a food plot to make them relate their entire daily movement around something like that food plot. Now, when you're hunting in like egg area, you can figure this out based on what egg fields they're feeding on. You do a little scouting, see which fields they're in and so on. But when you're in the big woods, you don't have egg, not nearby, or not a lot of it typically. And that's why you need to get these food plots in so that you can get those deer moving to them every single day. And then you can base the entire rest of your hunt around the movement to and from those food plots every day, rather than just betting on what natural food source is available on that given day and trying to get in a path where they're going to cross in front of you while they relate to that random food source. So if you don't want to see deer on a big woods parcel, by all means, just keep hunting. Don't put those food plots in. If you guys do want help putting those food plots in, I have other videos on my channel. I'll link those at the end of this one. But let's get into number 2. So the second way to have an absolute failure of a hunt on a big woods property is to let those big canopy trees just continue to choke out everything else on your property. Now, year after year after year, those big trees just keep continuing to grow. They grow bigger and lusher at the top, the part that's getting up to the sun, and they continue to choke out all of that undergrowth. So if you don't want deer on your property, leave those canopies up there, leave them choking everything out, and the deer are just going to start avoiding your area, because if they don't have cover and they don't have food down at their level, down at the ground where they can reach it, there's no reason for them to come to that part of the woods. So deer are creatures that love to be in the thickest part of the woods, and the easiest way to not have the thickest part of the woods is to have those big mature trees that just choke out all of that undergrowth that the deer absolutely love for browse and for bedding and for cover and just staying hidden and out of the elements and all of the things that deer love to do, which is why they're always in the thickest part of the woods. But by all means, do not have the thickest part of the woods if you don't want to see any deer. So let's get into the third thing. So if you really don't want to see any deer on a big woods parcel, by all means, cut all of that low undergrowth out from under those big trees. So I was actually talking to a guy the other day, and he had been hunting a specific stand for decades. And over the years, the undergrowth was starting to grow up and thicken up, and he was so worried that he couldn't see as far out of the stand as he used to be able to. So he went out and he cut a lot of that undergrowth out so that he could once again see as far into the woods as he used to be able to in any direction. And he figured by doing this, by being able to see further, he would see more deer. And this was a gun stand, so they would be in range for him. But the problem is once he'd cut all that undergrowth out, he was now seeing even less deer, and he couldn't believe it. Why would he be seeing less deer if he could see even more of the woods from his stand? And the reason being is, again, deer love that thickest part of the woods. They want to be in the thick part of the woods. We as humans always want to be able to like see really far off into the distance, but we really need to quell that down a little bit, because We do not need to see a deer 200 yards away if we set our property up perfectly to put those deer 20 yards in front of us. That deer that was 200 yards away will just walk right in front of you if your property is set up correctly with food plots, man-made deer trails, mock scrapes, water holes, all of those fun things. Create your own deer funnels and your own deer vacuums on your property. You can hunt those pinch points and the deer will walk right in front of you. You don't need to see 200 yards across a field or through the woods or down a shooting lane or whatever. Those are just big misconceptions that humans sort of make ourselves think we know, that if we can see further, we'll see the deer that's further away. But you have to keep in mind that these deer live out there 365 days a year. They don't want to walk into a big open area of the woods because they know they're vulnerable. So what we do is we make them feel safe by putting them in a thick area of the woods, down a man-made deer trail, to a mock scrape, to a water hole, from a food plot to a bedding area, and you hunt that pinch point and they go right in front of you. There's no need to have a 100-yard shooting lane cut through the woods. Deer avoid those like the plague. You will very rarely see a deer walk down one in daylight. They may cross them very quickly, but those older, more mature deer will actually walk all the way down to the end of them, cross in the thick part of the woods, and then keep going rather than cross that shooting lane. So don't even put those things in. I had one in a long time ago. It is just a little clover path that is in that area just to access if we need to pull a deer out of that area of the woods. It's not used for anything anymore. And to this day, the deer don't cross it, so we don't even hunt it. But it's in the woods. We're letting it thicken back up. But that was a mistake that I myself made a long time ago, and I'm passing that on to you guys. You do not want those big openings. Don't cut that thick underbrush out of your woods. That is exactly what you're trying to get established by removing those high canopy trees. Be the thickest part of the woods that's got the most browse, the best bedding, and of course those food sources. And you will have a ton of deer coming to your chunk of the woods as compared to what your neighbors have if you're all on an even playing field right now. So let's get into the next thing. If you want to make sure that you see no deer, the fourth thing you're going to want to do is have very horrible stand placement. You're going to want to put these things in the deepest, darkest back corner of your property so that you walk through your entire property almost like a deer drive. You're going to push everything off your property to get to that back stand because, of course, the biggest buck lives deepest in the woods, right? I've heard way too many guys say that, and that is absolutely not correct. The biggest bucks that have ever been shot off of my property were shot from stands where you could see the road from the stand. The ideal situation is to set up your properties so that that back, deep, dark back corner of your property is untouched in most situations. If you have like a corner lot or you have ag fields or whatever, we're talking about the big woods here though, you would typically leave that back part of your property untouched, other than maybe trying to develop it into bedding area or something. I mean untouched as far as hunting goes. And then you want to hunt your attractions that are more at like the middle part of your property, and then you access off of, say, the road or a field edge or whatever. So you're only disturbing the edges of your property to get into hunt. You're not walking through your entire property just to get to a stand in that deep, dark back corner where all the big bucks live. And of course, you're going to blast everything out. And when you're doing this, you're definitely going to want to walk on top of the highest ridge that can see hundreds of yards off into every direction, because then everything can see you from every direction, hundreds of yards away as well. You're definitely going to want to just get in there, make sure everything in the woods can see you coming and going, and get into that deep, dark back stand where those big bucks are. And you are definitely not going to see any deer if you do that. Now, like I said, the better way to do that is to just make sure those stands are where you're not putting a ton of pressure on your own property to get in and out of those stands. Put them on your edges, off of the road, off of wherever the house is, the cabin is, however your property is set up. But you definitely don't want to be going for a long walk through the middle of your property just to get to a stand, because you basically just blew out your entire property in order to do that. Although that is a great strategy for public land hunting, because you're trying to get to the deepest, darkest back corner of that public property away from all the other hunters, in a place where all those other hunters are going to push deer to you. On private property, that strategy does not hold up. You do not want to use that same public land strategy for private land. So the fifth failure I want to get into on big woods properties is pay absolutely no mind to your scent and your sound while on stand or while you're accessing into that stand. So like I said, if we're going to walk in on top of that hill to get all the way back to that stand that's way in the back corner, we might as well also make sure that our scent is blasting right into a bedding area that's a couple hundred yards downwind. That'll make sure every deer in that bedding area goes the exact opposite direction, and we will never see them on a sit. So you definitely want to be mindful of not just where your wind is blowing when you're sitting in the stand, but make sure you're paying attention to where your wind is blowing while you're ingressing and egressing from that stand. And when you're setting up those access points and those trails, make sure you have wind in mind. So not just when you're going to hunt that day, but to give yourself some extra advantage before you even hunt, is maybe set up trails. Maybe there's multiple trails to the same stand depending on different winds or whatever, so that you can get in and out of there without blasting your scent into like a bedding area or a feeding area, wherever you think the deer are at that time when you're ingressing or egressing from that stand. Now the other thing is sound. So we did want to hunt that way back deep corner of the property, right? We might as well take the ATV back there. Let's make all the noise in the world. Let's run that thing back there. ATVs don't bother deer, right? They do. I've had a ton of situations where guys are running ATVs and here comes a herd of deer bolting the other direction hundreds of yards away. These guys on the ATVs didn't even know those deer were there because the deer took off well before those guys on the ATVs were able to see them. If you absolutely need an ATV to drag out a deer or whatever, by all means use it then, and I would recommend using it after night. Leave that deer lay. If you shoot it in the morning, gut it, but don't disturb the woods unless you're tagged out at that point or whatever. But get in there after dark, get it out as quickly as possible. But if you're able and capable of like dragging it out by yourself or by hand or with a sled or whatever, I would highly recommend doing that instead. And then all the more reason to hunt those stands that are closer to the road, because then your drag isn't as far either. So if you're in that back deep dark corner of the property, do not use an ATV to get in and out of your stand if you can absolutely help it. If you do have mobility issues, there are a lot better ways to handle getting in and out of a stand. Like I said, we have shot the biggest bucks within eyesight of the road on my property. There are ways of making a nice, easy trail that is easy to travel to get into those stands that are not that far off the edge of the road without having to drive into them. Now, of course, if you have mobility issues, that's on you, and by all means, I hope everybody has a chance to enjoy the great outdoors. I'm just telling you these things are going to have a detrimental effect on your hunt, so try not to use them if you don't have to. And if you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks you're really going to enjoy this one too. So go check that one out. And if you are really trying to figure out, hey, how do I put these food plots in the woods? Go check this one out too. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.